He's known as the godfather of spoken word. Talam Acey, the spoken word artist and producer of the Spoken Word Apex at NJPAC, coming up on Saturday, August 24th at 8 p.m. The poet curator is joining us now. Talam Acey, great to have you on the show.
Thanks. It's great to be here. I really appreciate the welcome.
A homecoming for you, coming back to
Yeah.
Newark. Tell us
Yep.
what that means. Now, you performed with your program last year at NJPAC, but through the
Right.
years, you have done many things, in New Jersey and in Newark. But
Mhm.
what does it mean to come back this time?
It means a lot to me. So when you say I'm from Newark, I was born in Martland Hospital in 1970, and I remember before they tore down that building at University Hospital, how I used to just go to the building because I felt like it was like a little pilgrimage to where I was from. It was right over there by Georgia King Village. Um, it- what coming back to Newark to do shows, it means a lot to me because I had a conversation earlier about growing up in Newark. So I went to Newark daycare, I went to Chaz School, I went to St. Benedict's Prep in Newark. I went to Essex County College, Rutgers University, NJIT for a stint. And in the earlier days, we took trips to certain places like Symphony Hall, to the museum, to the library, and then NJPAC, when it was created, right? They were looking for programming from the city, from the community. And we had a open mic at something called the Euphoria Cafe in downtown Newark, over by the Prudential Building. And they came in there, they saw what we were doing. And from that point, they had me coming in first to perform. Then they had me coming into NJPAC to curate shows. And then they brought me in to curate an event for the Dodge Poetry Festival. So that was all like someone saying, here's their budget, curate the show. This is like investing in it myself, like coming back to the place that was, a big deal and still is a big deal to me, that I think is one of the most prestigious theaters, rooms in the world, and telling them, look, can I now on my own come in there, curate shows like you used to ask me to do, and then everything is just on me. Like I just believe in it. I believe in putting together the best show possible, putting together an evening that people will never forget. Like I don't think anything on August 24th that's going on anywhere else in the world from an entertainment standpoint is going to be as entertaining and moving. That's how I produce something.
We'll talk about the lineup in a moment, but I love how you got introduced really to spoken word. You went to a show and you said, "Wait a minute," and in a few moments you were done with it. You went and started to do it on your own. You went to your car and started
That
to write your own spoken word. So
Yeah,
you
that was the
knew
whole
that
reason
this
we
it was
formed.
a
Yeah.
calling of some sort for you, wasn't
I
it?
had to. I couldn't take it. I couldn't even sit there. For the first time I went to see this new generation of spoken word. So I grew up in poetry, like it's with my family coming from the Mary Baraka's Committee for Unified Newark, my mother and my father belonging to that. Poetry was always a part of my life. I learned to read from poetry, from reading, Dudley Randall, and reading your County Cullens and your Claude McKay's. So, and Langston Hughes, Simple Simon stories were like bedtime stories for me. So they were always read to me. And then I began to, when I learned to read, I began to read it myself. So I've always been with poetry and always been interested in performance poetry throughout my life, throughout my upbringing. But then, in the late 80s, when, you got Jessica Care Moore coming on the Apollo, and you've got Love Jones, the movie coming out, and I'm starting to move around, in the 90s, to different poetry clubs and cafes. Yeah. So what happened was, when we were young. So that's why I was laughing when you mentioned, the situation, because I was trying to put together like these gentlemen's parties, in Irvington and all this stuff. And a friend of mine was working with me to do it, and it wasn't working out. I wasn't really committed to it. It wasn't my calling. Right. It didn't fulfill my sense of purpose. But he told me about something else he was doing, which was poetry. And I didn't want to go because I thought it would be boring. I didn't want to sit there snapping my fingers and so on and so forth, and having to think too much. I didn't want to interrupt my lounge, uh, uh, my lounge behavior, my lounge relaxation. But I went because I had just missed his birthday and I felt bad. And when I got there and heard it, I saw myself performing, but I didn't have a poem of that caliber and that type to perform. So I went out to the car and I started putting together poems in my head. And then 2 weeks later, right, they did the show again, and I was there and I was ready.
It's funny that you mentioned, I didn't want to think too much. I didn't want it to interrupt, but that's what you do when you do your spoken word. People are being asked to think about life, think about their situation, think about how your words impact them. So you've kind of taken over that role of something that you're like, well, don't interrupt. But now you want people to respond to you. What has been through the years the most impactful comment you have received from somebody seeing you perform spoken word?
It's funny that you would say that. It's almost like you're psychic or something, because prior to this conversation, I was brainstorming the things that I think have been impactful. So I mean, I've seen people who have had tattoos of quotes from my work. There's one sister I have one on her shoulder that she posted on social media, from my work. I've seen a video of somebody on YouTube in China, right, doing a project for their college class, and they were translating and explaining one of my poems in their particular Chinese dialect. I've had people fly. I never understood it either, right? Because I'd have people fly from Ohio to Virginia, like 6 women, like, it's her birthday, we're gonna come see you. But I'm like, but I'll be in Ohio next month, you know what I mean? But it was important. But I guess next month it wouldn't have been like her birthday. I've seen people go from Chicago and fly to Philly. I've seen people drive from Michigan all the way to New Orleans, or one woman told me from the Midwest to Charlotte just to see a feature. So I mean, these to me, these are impactful things. When we did the movie, when I was in that What Black Men Thinks movie, and I did that poem Market, people were showing it to their families. My wife, when I met her, was telling me her father had played the poem for her, from the movie, just to get her thoughts. Another woman told me that her and her adult daughter get together and have a Talam AC Day, I don't know, once or twice a year, where they just sit back and watch YouTube videos of work. So, I mean, these are the things I was brainstorming, and not for the purpose of this interview. That's why I say, it's almost like you're psychic, because I was brainstorming just to make myself feel better.
That's very interesting. When you're performing, times change, certain things don't, certain things stay the same. So
Right.
when you're coming to NJ how do you try to how fresh can you keep it? I mean, do things just automatically pop into your mind, or do you have these things laid out in your mind before the show? Are you able to read the crowd and say, I think I want to talk about this tonight?
Yeah. I never show up knowing exactly which pieces I'm going to do personally. I do. I fill out the crowd. I fill the room. It's the position of the sun, moon, and stars at the time. It's the what I hear before me. And if it's poetry before me, if there are poets before me, which usually there are, if you're featured, I get to see what they're doing and how it moves the crowd and what the crowd is gravitating towards. And because in my feeling, anything I say that I wrote, I meant. So I'm never insincere. If I pick certain poems, it's not to cater to the crowd, there's nothing inauthentic about it, because the poem itself is authentic. It's just a question of, you know, I once heard somebody talk about communication and say communication isn't, what I thought I said, is what you thought you heard. Right. So it's a question of sitting down. And if there's no poets before me, I like to get in there early, hear the conversations as people are coming in the room. It gives you some kind of like compass as to what this night should be. And in terms of, that's me keeping it fresh for my set and the poems I do. But in terms of keeping the show fresh, it's about mixing up the lineup and constantly looking for, newer people on the scene who haven't had that type of exposure, who bring in something new and fresh. So there are people that I'm studying even now that don't even know I'm looking at them.
Mm.
People who may have only been doing this for a year or two, but I'm watching them and I'm studying them and I'm thinking, I never would have done something in that way. I think this is really, there's an effervescence to what this person is doing, and I'd like to put that on a larger platform.
The country is so divided right now, and has been for quite some time,
400 years. Yeah.
right? So take us to one of your most recent works. What do you want to get across to the audience at NJPAC with your most recent stuff? What's bugging Salam AC right now? What's something that you say, I have to talk about this, or I'm not getting through what I need to get through tonight?
One of the subjects that I talk about a lot, in addition to love, sometimes I talk about depression and ways of circumventing that feeling. But one of the primary subjects, and the first thing that came to mind when you asked me that question, is about young men and women, particularly those who are underprivileged, who may be being misguided by others who are sponsored, or who have investors who don't have the best interest of the community at heart. And I write a lot of work to try to convince them to communicate, like we said earlier, not what not what I think I'm saying, but trying to say it in a way that I think they can receive it and understand it, to kind of redirect them into what I think is a more appropriate vector for somebody who wants to be successful and happy later on in life. Because the whole temporal living, the whole listening and guiding your life by people who are just telling you what would be fun for the moment, turns out in most cases to be really destructive over time.
You had the opportunity not only to be inspired by the late Amiri Baraka, but perform with him and then do tributes to him.
Right.
When I say Amiri Baraka, what is the first thing that pops into your mind?
Remiss. I'm remiss because I could have spent way more time with him. So like I've been to the Kamiko's Blues People, the open mic he had at his house on South 10th Street. I have done, as you mentioned, I performed at shows, opened up, in shows that he was in. We've talked socially. I've been to his house just to talk. And the thing that strikes me the most when I think about him is I didn't realize that I had a level of significance to him. Right? I felt insignificant, and every time we met each other, I was thinking he was meeting me for the first time. Even though I was a child in the organization when my mother and father was in Community for Unified Newark in 70, 71, but it turned out not to be true. When he passed, that was the first time I saw his article when he was writing about the Angels in America. And he was criticizing it. And he mentioned me. He mentioned a list of poets that should have been in the book, and he mentioned my name. And I never thought that he even knew me that well, even though we had interacted, several times in life.
The thing was,
Or respected and appreciated what I did, enough to say, hey, how is this a book about poetry and you don't have Talam Ace? That blew my mind.
yeah.
And I couldn't even thank him because he was gone by the time that I saw that. But I spent so much of his later years trying to stay out of his way, thinking I didn't want to be a nuisance.
Wow. Good story.
I
And
should be sitting at his footsteps.
when I, my impressions of Mary come from personal experience at WBGO was that, obviously know about his poetry and his history, but when I had him in for a sports jam episode, his knowledge of sports and his love of sports kind of blew me away, talking about going to the Giants game with his dad and seeing there was only one black player for the New York Giants at that time. Emlyn Tennell was the player that he idolized, and watching. I even told, Mayor Baraka, I said, your dad was incredible when he came in to talk about his love for sports. And during that episode, he did his poetry Bones, and watching him perform right on the table and
Right.
talking about that was truly amazing. Now you have that same kind of impact on people, Talam, and you've done TED Talks through the years. You've done
Yeah.
performances around the world.
Right.
Speaking to a Newark audience on Saturday,
Mm-hmm.
what's different about that audience maybe than an audience in London?
Well, because now you're home. When you hear when I talk about coming into a place ahead of time and listening to the conversations, ear hustling a little bit what people are saying or looking at how people are responding to poets, it's a little more difficult when you're not home because your context and home at home is similar to the same people who had the same upbringing, who came up in the same geographical area. So there's a lot less work to reach people because the language that I speak, the way that I speak, the way that I've learned that this world works, the way my whole worldview was shaped in Newark, right? Was shaped in, from the beginning. And I don't even think I mentioned Chad School, right? I came up also in Chad School in Newark. So you have a connection to people. And I've been to a lot of places, and I refer to other cities as like my aunts and stuff. So Newark is my mother. And then New York is like my rich aunt, always like showing off, whatever, kind of looking down on my mother sometimes, but still loves her, right? And then Chicago is like the aunt I never knew, like that long lost aunt, because Chicago to me is Newark, if Newark were a larger city, and so on and so forth. And St. Louis, just to skip naming every city, was a city like that I would go to, and it would be so similar to Newark in that I could do whatever poem I wanted to do. I didn't have to think too much about what people wanted to hear on that particular night, because almost anything I did would reach them, because there must be some similar situation. And the same thing, of course, at home. I don't have to think as much about what I want to do because I'm already better understood at home. I'm already of the same ilk, the same energy.
Fans of your spoken word may or may not be aware that you had a 1 year stint as a professor at Rutgers talking about finance and things like that at Rutgers University. After
Right.
your MBA, you were almost the same age as the kids you were teaching.
There
Has
were people
any
in my there were people in my class I used to study with, right? And then
other
that was comfortable because they're looking at you like you're supposed to throw them a couple extra points because you know them, you know what I mean? So there were people I used to study with, to take tests and do homework with, who were now my students, that quickly.
so I
Yeah.
wanted to know, have any of those students come back and reached out to you and say, "Hey, wait a minute. You were my teacher and now you're this world famous spoken word artist. What happened?"
I have not had that. But the thing is, I often say people will tend to talk about me rather than to me. And a lot of times you see people and you can tell somebody knows you from somewhere, but they're not speaking to you. You know what I mean? And I make it a point when I see somebody, whether even if I think they're a celebrity or famous, I talk to them and I tell them that their work moved me. But everyone's not like that. So that is to say, I can't say that they haven't seen me and they don't know, just that they haven't, no one has ever reached out to me and said that.
Hmm. So what do you want to say about the lineup? I know you have some really wonderful
We got, yeah,
spoken word artists, a lot from the
heavy hitters.
area as well. Tell us about it.
Yeah, right. I mean, we've got Georgia Me from Atlanta, who's like the queen of that poetry. So on every season of that poetry from the beginning, she was the main woman that they spotlighted, the main woman poet that they spotlighted. Uh, and then we have Roddy, who is a sister who is from New Jersey, who kind of represents, and I'm only saying it because she's openly lesbian. She that's part of what she writes about. She preaches or discusses or what's the word I like, proselytizes body positivity. And I can't wait to see her in New Jersey. I've seen her outside of New Jersey. I've seen her in California, for instance. And then we have K Love, who is like pretty much at this point a social media influencer. She does like special programs for women all over the country where she pulls together everyone from the young women and the at-risk youth to what we call, like what I like to call saints, which are like the older sisters who are like church going and they wear the big hats and so on. And so she pulls all of that together. That's K Love. We've got Obi West, who is probably one of the bigger names. Him and also Black Chakra. I brought them both to Baltimore once just because I wanted to see the two. What appeared to be the two people who were becoming kings of spoken word in America. I wanted to see them on the same stage, and I didn't know if that had ever been done before. So now I'm doing it again. Right, so I'm bringing Black Chakra and Obi West to NJ Pack. Obi West is from L.A. He's based in Vegas right now, and Black Chakra is from Baltimore. And then, I could go on and on and on. We've got Queen Moore, who is a mover and shaker in the city of Newark and a community activist. We've got Positive Gunter, who is also based in Newark. We've got James Ellerby, who is somebody who was actually on a poetry scene with me back in Bogey's days, back in East Orange on William Street. And, there are 12 performers, including Narubi Salah, who was the first New Jersey with the New Jersey Poetry Slam champion. So I was the person who had the honor of founding the New Jersey National Slam team back in 2000. So New Jersey was all of the members of the New York City Slam team in 1999 were from New Jersey, all of us. And then you could only, in the New Eureka Cafe, you could only be on there 1 year, right? That was the limit. So I started the New Jersey Slam team in 2000, and I ran it in 2000 and 2001. So now Ruby was the first slam winner for New Jersey. So it was going to be fresh, like bringing someone who was a slam winner 20-something years ago and putting her on the same stage with Radi, who was like the latest and greatest thing that people are talking about all over the country, who was also based in New Jersey, right? So it's going to be, the curation is what I put the most pride in. So I'm not so much of a promoter where I'm constantly worried about how many people, how do I pack this place? I'm worried about the people who are there and that they are getting the best experience that they could possibly get, and that it's going to be something that they never forget for the rest of their life. That's my concern.
Great outlook. Let's say young, teen, doesn't matter, gender. What kind of advice? They're looking to you and saying, oh, maybe they're going back to that person that you were saying, hey, I'd like to write my own. I don't even know if I want to listen. I want to write my own. So
Right.
what advice would you give a young person trying to be the next Salam AC?
I would tell them, one, to never rush something that they're writing. Right. I know people who have a writing, their writing technique is to write every day, no matter what. Some famous writers actually have that same rule. I don't. I only write generally when I'm inspired, but I'm always writing in my mind in the background. And I don't care. There are pieces and lines that I have now that may not end up being a part of full poems for a year. So I would tell them, don't rush it. Poems have gestation periods, just like babies. They're not always 9 months. Sometimes they're 9 hours. Sometimes they are 9 months. But let the poem take its time and become what it wants to become. Number one. Number two, you need to always think about who you are as an individual, and you want to always try to write those poems that only you could write, about the topics that you care most about, that you think most about, that you're most passionate about, because it shows. It shows in the writing, it shows in the presentation of it, and the audience, and that's what the audience is gravitating towards. We call it energy transfer. So it's about transferring the feeling that you have about something you care about, whether you love it or detest it. And you transfer that energy to the crowd, and they feel that.
You love jazz. Tell us about it.
Absolutely. I love jazz, and one of the last book I finished was a reread of Amiri Baraka's Blues People, and he has another one, Black Music. So I know he has those two books on music. Jazz has been my thing forever. I'm a hard bop jazz fan, which is funny because in the book Blues People that he's not a fan of that era of jazz. He liked bebop, he liked the big band before, but he doesn't necessarily like the hard bop. He likes what came after Ornette Coleman, and how Ornette Coleman influenced Sonny Rollins, and how all those cats, from Watts came over and started playing the free jazz and the modular, stuff. But I read about it all the time. If you were to name someone, I'm pretty sure almost anyone you can name, I've probably read their biography or read about them. I've read about the aficionados. I've read about the George Weems, anyone who put together jazz shows. All of it. Ask me my favorites. I like Joe Henderson, big Art Blakey fan, and the whole Art Blakey school. Including your Horace Silvers, your Bobby Timmons. I don't know. I watch old jazz videos. If you were to ask me, like, if I could go back in time and see something, I would want to go back in time and see some of these jazz concerts. I want to see John Coltrane at the Fillmore West. I want to see those things. I want to see Miles Davis at the Newport Jazz Festival, right? Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
Norman Granz, and George Wein. So Norman Granz, of course, was jazz at Philharmonic, and George Wein was all the festivals from JVC to Cool to New Orleans to on and on and on. And I just study it, man. I like the stories. I like to hear about jazz and blues artists. I've read a ton of books on blues artists, from your Muddy Waters, your Howlin' Wolf, your Willie Dixon, everyone. Buddy Guy read his book, you name it, and Odetta. I go back to that stuff. Love it. Sister Rosetta Tharpe, just going to Thorpe. I go back to that, like everything. I'm just into it. Love it.
One last question for you. You can go back in history to any era and meet somebody and have a conversation and maybe even perform spoken word for that person. Who would it be and why?
Uh, this is cheating. If I could go back in history and meet someone, and it's cliche, but I really would love to ask Malcolm X some questions, about different points in his life. So if I could go back and talk to someone, um, that's who it would be. But I wouldn't necessarily want to perform a poem for Malcolm. The person I would want to perform a poem for would be Sekou Sundiata, because I just really loved the way that he was writing at the time. Either him or Etheridge Knight. I just love that writing, and I would love for them to critique what I write. So that would be the difference. I would want to meet Malcolm and talk to him, but I would want to perform for Etheridge Knight or for Sekou Sundiata.
If you want to get the best in spoken word, you've heard from the godfather of spoken word, Talam Acey, the spoken word artist and producer of the Spoken Word Apex. That'll be at NJ Pack on August 24th. That's this Saturday at 8 p.m. The concert, as you mentioned, features 12 performers from across the region and the nation. Poet, curator, Talam Acey, what a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.